Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so anyway, now, what's up, guys? All right, it's been a minute since we had a flip, right? But it's good stuff. All right, so we are wrapping up the. We're wrapping up archaic Greece, kind of right here, right? Not completely. All right, so what we're doing right now, okay? A lot of you guys right now are like a little bit ahead. Couple days ahead, blah, blah, blah. All right, so this is just the A period class today. F and D, we'll be doing this tomorrow night, all right? So the big thing we're trying to get at now, though, is now that we know that the archaic Greeks had like archaic Greeks had like a uniform culture, right? Similar languages, similar trade items, things like that. Now we're getting into kind of how like the origin of these other two big things, right? So we've got Athens on the one hand, Sparta on the other, right? Some of y'all are immediately probably like, I don't even know what that is. All right, so, well, let's look at this map of Greece really quick, right? So fast forward a pretty good while, right? Athens and Sparta end up being, listen closely, all right? So after the Mycenaeans fall, all right, they fall, Bronze Age collapses, the Dark Ages are everybody figuring their life out. Right when all that stuff changes into archaic Greece, okay, the two powerful city-states that rise up during this archaic period are Athens, here in the green, all right, and Sparta and their allies, here in the red, all right? So now, this is where the geographic isolation thing comes into play. Some of you are like, Mr. Terry, we just talked about how are they isolated if all the Greeks did very similar things? Well, when the Mycenaeans fell, they left behind a lot of things, right? Their language, their writing, some of their trade items, some of their vessels, some of their concepts, right? But when they fell and then the Dorians start kind of reorganizing and resettling everything, two different city-states did not communicate with one another, and those are Athens and Sparta. And ironically enough, they rise up, because of geographic isolation, they didn't communicate, they rise up to become the two most powerful city-states in the ancient Greek period, right? Now, the fun thing is to use geographic isolation to explain how they are wildly different places, all right? So different cultures, different people, different everything. And I love talking about Sparta first, all right? So Sparta is the first one. Sparta is this extreme, intense warrior society settled right near former Mycenae, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because the Mycenaeans were very militaristic, very warrior-like, very intense, very all of the above, right? So, anyway, why is this one-third of my hair just keep making me mad? But the big thing excuse me. Now, the big thing is the Spartans are going to grow and prosper right after the Dorian. Oh, yeah, look at my little Lego guy. Look at that six-pack. That's ridiculous. All right, so anyway, now, settled by the Dorians. So the Dorians show up, right? They kind of take the Mycenaeans out. They're messing around. And then they're like, wait, we have to rebuild society because we don't know how to read and write, right? Because the Dark Ages happen. Well, as this stuff begins to settle down, they begin to settle new little cities and towns, right? And then they begin farming again. And then they begin creating society again. Well, one of those little towns or cities or societies is called Sparta, right? So Sparta begins to rise up. Now, Sparta, every single man of age becomes a soldier. Spartans are a hyper-militaristic society. Every man in Sparta becomes a what? A soldier, right? So every man in Sparta, your ultimate job is to become the soldier that you were meant to be, right? Sorry, one second, hold on. So, that is the concept, right? You are growing up to be a soldier, right? You are going out to be a military individual to protect your empire. But some of y'all are like immediately like, well, wait a minute. I know like Kaylee has a question. Kaylee Roche is going to be like, wait, but Mr. Terry, this doesn't make any sense. You just said they started farming again, right? Well, how the heck are these people farming if they're all going out practicing stabbing each other? It's a great question, Kaylee, all right? Well, let me tell you real quick. They actually, when they would take people over, would actually turn those people into slaves, right? And those slaves would farm for them. And these slaves were called helots, right? So say helot one time. Helot, right? Very nice. Say it to yourself one time. Good job. Very impressed, right? I really, really hope that a bunch of y'all were just like, Helot, right? Isabella Mora, I bet you were just like, Helot, right? So good stuff, okay? Helots are how Spartans functioned. So what they would do is they would force them to farm for them. So all the men on the while could do what? Focus on being in a military society, right? Now, some of y'all are immediately like, well, how do they have a government if everybody's being soldier? Well, usually their kings were actually royal-born individuals of noble soldier families, right? So they had two of them. They had two kings. One was meant to control the military. The other one was meant to try and make sure that the city-state stayed functional, right? So usually it was a very, very intelligent individual that was a little bit more versed in government. And the other Spartan king, much like the king Leonidas, which we'll talk about later on, is in charge of their military. And then they had a large council of elders above them, right? So elders that actually had existed in the society that would actually give them advice and refer back to them, okay? That's how they actually did their government. All right, so citizens in Sparta were only considered men over the age of 30, Spartan-born males over the age of 30. Everyone else is considered a subject, right? So citizens have something to say and can contribute to their society, right? So they believed even though you were a soldier from a young age to 30, you still weren't a citizen yet because you hadn't done enough time in battle, right? So the Spartans are a very intense people, right? Sparta is right here, as you can tell. This is Sparta right there, all right? So, and as I said earlier, Mycenae was actually right there. So it makes sense that they're like a little bit of crossover, right? So this is the craziest part about Sparta in general, right? All newborns in Sparta were checked by a government inspector. A man was sent to your home, ladies, if you were a Spartan woman, which you also were very important in society. We'll get to that here in a second. All right, so you were checked, or not you, but your child was checked by a government inspector to make sure that it wasn't underweight, make sure it wasn't sick, make sure it wasn't deformed, because they can't be putting out soldiers that are deformed and things like that, right? And if it was deformed, that inspector would take your child into the woods and abandon it to be eaten by wolves, right? Because they have no time for people that are sick or underweight, because they are the Spartans, right? And if you were fit enough to go off to war, at age 7, you left your home, right? At age 7, a young man would leave his home and go and begin military training at the age of 7. All right, so 7 years old, and you never lived with your parents ever again because they moved into a barracks, right? A barracks is like a big training camp, right? It's a big area. Imagine like camp, but really sad, and you're like dodging swords regularly, right? So barracks is where they had to live, and they were toughened up by an extremely intense diet. Guess what they got to eat every day? Oh, blood soup. All right, so yeah, they were actually given a mixture of blood, animal bone marrow, and vinegar. That's actually what they ate usually on a daily basis. They would exercise every single day and be instructed with rigid discipline, right? To develop sneakiness, this is another really, really cool thing too. They fed them these things, but the officers would eat in front of them, and the officers ate very well, right? The officers would sit up front and eat lamb, figs, dates, wine. They would actually sit up there and actually eat the products that the helots had been farming, and they would eat it in front of these boys' faces. They were encouraged to try and steal food from officers, right? Because if you did it and got away with it, developed sneakiness and cunning, right? So, but if you got caught, they would be punished in the yard in front of everybody, severely beaten, right? So it's a very, very intense system when you think about it. At age 20, men could go out and get married, and it was an arranged marriage from their parents, right? But they still had to live in the barracks for another 10 years. So they could be married at age 20, but still could not even live with their wives for another 10 years. They were not allowed to move out the barracks until they were 30, all right? So this is another crazy thing, too. The Spartan woman, right? That right there is a statue of a Spartan woman exercising. We actually believe that's from the archaic period because women in Sparta were required to exercise. They had to show up and strengthen their bodies every single day at a certain time of the morning, meet up with one another, because it is believed that they had to produce strong warriors, right? Women in Sparta could also inherit property, right? Which is another monumental thing. Women in Sparta, jot this down, women in Sparta actually had more rights than women in Athens, and Athens is considered to be the intelligent society, the government one, the smarty smart ones, right? Which is a little ridiculous, if you ask me. Now, anyway, so Sparta also, though, is going to do another major thing. They are going to isolate themselves away from the other Greeks, right? They're going to actually take their society and isolate over here. They intentionally stayed alone, right? Citizens were not allowed to travel. They discouraged trade because they were like, we have our helots, they will farm for us, we will take care of it, we don't need to trade with you, right? So they didn't even really have a naval fleet or boats at their disposal. They were pretty landlocked, right? This made them very unique, but also an extremely deadly society, right? So, because they now have the biggest and best group of soldiers that the Greeks had ever seen. But then you got Athens, right? Athens is a little bit different. Athens is a little bit more scholarly, right? They are the nerd to the Spartans' varsity jock, right? So now Athens is considered ruled by the people because they actually invented and developed democracy, right? So we talked about this in class. This is the Acropolis of Athens. That is the famous Parthenon, the beautiful temple to Athena that is now in ruins because it's ruined. I don't know if you know that's where the word ruins comes from, but it's because the site itself is ruined. All right, so anyway, now, but the Parthenon is an amazing structure of Greek architecture, and to this day there's architectural oddities that we just aren't quite sure what happened with it. But the Athenians claim to be settled by these people known as the Ionians, right? So the Ionians are another group of people that are actually from northern Greece, right? They actually are like right around the Turkey, Troy area, right? It is believed the Athenians claim that they were settled by those people, not by the Dorians. They were not settled by the people that destroyed society, not by wandering blind poets or anything like Homer, right? Or the people who settled the Spartans. They were the Ionians. So can we already see how Athenians believe that they are like smarter and better than everyone already, right? So they started out as this thing called an aristocracy, which is where wealthy landowners were in charge, right? We talked about Spartan's government, right? Sparta's government had 2 kings and a council of elders, right? But they mainly focused on their military. The Athenians started out as a place that was ruled by the wealthy, right? Whoever had the most land actually had the most say in their society, right? Now, this wealth grew very extreme and very fast amongst the upper class, right? They're going to start actually growing and growing and growing, and then start sucking in smaller city-states from outside their city. They're going to start pulling them in, right? So to form one big city-state known as Athens, right? So Athenians, I believe, are a very good definition of them as being extra, right? But then this guy comes along named Solon, right? S-O-L-O-N, okay? Circle his name really quick because he's going to change it all. Because what he did is he was appointed chief official in 594 BC. And he is considered the father of modern-day government. Now, really, really quickly, jot this down. Jot this down. Before Solon, it was ruled by tyrants, right? So Athens had devolved its government away from this aristocracy, the wealthy ruling, right? So let's use an example really quick, right? In my Yay class, right, there's Heather, Isabella Mora, and Sky, and yeah, we use those 3. Isabella Mora, Sky, Heather. They are, and Cameron. There we go. All right, so those 4 girls were the wealthiest girls in our A class. So that's an aristocracy, right? They get to decide what happens to all of us because they have the most money. Well, Cameron decides that she has the most power, right? And she rises up, and she actually uses her wealth and money to push down the other 3, Isabella, Heather, and Sky, and then becomes what is known as a tyrant, right? So she actually was not elected, was not chosen, was only ruling because she had the most resources, right? And was also very rude in the entire process. She becomes a tyrant, right? Well, then Solon comes along, and he ends the reign of the tyrants, right? So put that down. He ends the reign of the tyrants, right? He outlaws debt slavery, which was another really big problem, right? A lot of these aristocratic owners were only really powerful because every single time someone was their slave, it's mainly because they owed them money, right? So, also, not to mention, he pushes Athens towards the concept of democracy, right? And they begin to create a democratic system in Athens following the, reforms of Solon, right? So now Solon also helped create legislative systems, which actually creates, a ruling body of people, not just one singular ruler, right? In Athens, they also created voting. In Athens, they would actually vote using white and black rocks, right? They would actually be like, do you want to vote for this guy or do you want to vote for this guy? And you would walk up to a pile of rocks and you would pick that respective color and put it in a jar, right? So, and then they would break the jar open and then count up all the rocks, and that's how they did voting in Athens. Isn't that neat? All right, so now, Democracy, though, remember, is ruled by representative bodies, okay? So the democratic system actually made the Athenians have the ability to choose their leaders independently. Unfortunately, only land-owning male citizens could participate in the government because Athenian women did not have many rights, all right? So now, Athenian women were not allowed to participate in politics. They ran the entire household, and they were essential for a lot of religious ceremonies, but women had more freedom in Sparta. Women were not allowed to leave the home without a male escort in Athens, unless they were going to one place, the communal well, to get water. That's it. All right. So they weren't allowed to divorce. They weren't allowed to claim property. They weren't allowed to do any of those things. Right. So women in Athens actually had it pretty rough. Right. Then they also, though, in Athens, are going to create an education system. But of course, that education system is only for who again? Young boys, right? So women were also not allowed to receive an education in Athens, right? As you can see right here, this man is instructing this young man on poetry. And then right there, he is actually playing what's known as a lyre, L-Y-R-E. It's a Lat lyre. It's like a little harp, right? So like the Athenian education system was geared towards boys who attended schools if their families could afford them, right? They learned to read, write, study music, memorize poetry, public speaking, and received some, but very little military training. If they received training in anything, usually it was in sports, right? To prepare for like things like the Olympics and stuff like that. Wrestling is a very, very big sport for the Athenians. And that is it, right? So that's the societies of Athens and Sparta. It's just kind of an easy overview. And we're going to get into them a little bit more in depth when we actually lead up to the Persian Wars, all right, starting tomorrow. So I'll see you guys then. Have a great evening.